Hello again, class. This is the last and third video that you will watch. It's about chapter 3, and it talks about personality, perception, and attitude. One key thing here to consider is that you need to do a shift in your thinking, because we were talking about the organization and talking about things from an organizational perspective. Now we will focus more on the individual. So we'll talk about the employees, the individuals in the organization. So we need to do this shift in your mindset and start thinking individually. Okay. So we'll talk about personality first, and we are, as individuals, we are different from each other, obviously. So and based on the where we grew up, based on the people we interacted with, based on the experiences that we got throughout our lives, we are all different. So individuals are different. This is something key that you need to keep in mind as future leaders, because your employees will be different, and what you can use to motivate one employee may not work for another employee. How you uh, you know encourage someone to do something is different from how you encourage someone else to do it. So just keep that in mind, and we will talk more about how people are different in their personalities. As I mentioned, there are many factors that change the or impact the behavior of the individual. And throughout this chapter, I want you to look at this from your own perspective, and also apply it to someone else that you know, whether it's your colleague or direct report if you have any. So you'll notice here that there are two main variables or categories or types of variables that influence the individual behavior in the organization. You have the person, him or herself, and the environment. So the person, depending on their skills and abilities, depending on their personality, perception, attribution, attitudes, values, and ethics, it shapes their behavior. Now, on the other hand, the environment, the organization itself, and the work group that they work at also influence their behavior. And we will learn about personality, perception, attribution in this chapter. In future chapters, we will talk about attitudes, values, and we will talk about ethics as well. So let's start with the personality. And there are many theories that help explain the personalities of people. We have, and before we get to the theories, it makes sense to actually define what personality is. So personality is the relatively stable set of characteristics that influences individuals' behavior and lends it consistency. So the key things here, it's relatively stable. People don't behave the same way all the times, but there are some relatively stable characteristics that they behave according to. So it's not consistent all the time, it's relatively consistent. And the personality impacts and influences the individual behavior. So that's why you, as a future leader, you need to know different types of personalities, so you can relate and understand why someone is behaving the way that they are behaving. There are, as I mentioned, several theories. There is a one theory or one group of theories that focus on the traits of the individual. So they look at the behavioral patterns and they associate them with particular traits. There is also another approach that is called the integrative approach, which does not only focus on the traits of the individual, but they also look at the situational variables and the dispositions and the situation to predict how the behavior will be. So two types, we have the trait theory, we have the integrative approach. We'll start with the trait theories, and we have one theory is the big five personality traits, and this lists five traits and the characteristics of each trait. Again, this is relatively stable. So if you know someone who's extraversion and that individual is generous, assertive, etc., they may not be like this all the time in every situation, but these are kind of general characteristics. So the big five traits are extraversion, agreeableness, conscientious. I'm sorry, I always have a hard time pronouncing this word, conscientiousness, maybe. But the key thing is, I'm not gonna ask you about like the definition of each of these traits, but it's helpful for you to know what each trait, what are the characteristics that associated with each trait. Uh, think about yourself and where do you fit here in these traits. And the big question to ask is why this is important. Why do you need to know these traits? Is because it will help you understand and also direct the behavior of your colleagues or behavior of your direct report. So if you look, let's take an example, the agreeableness trait. If you have a person who's cooperative and warm and agreeable, you will approach them differently from if they are not like this. So keep that in mind, and it's not, as I said, not necessarily all the characteristics are applicable all the time, but this is a general idea. I lost the slide. This is just an explanation of uh, how you can benefit from understanding these personality characteristics. Now, one thing to consider, as I said, is the situation itself. Because sometimes if you have what is called strong situation, where it's very serious situation, sometimes the situation overwhelm the effect of the individual personality. So they are impacted more by the situation rather than their their personality. Now, on the other hand, the personality has a weaker effect in or has a stronger effect in weaker situations. So, for example, if you are in a performance review or performance appraisal, which is with your leader, which is considered a strong situation, you will be professional, you will act professionally, even if you are not that serious at work. Even if you are like you prefer to be in a unprofessional setup or unprofessional work environment. But in some situation where you have these kinds of strong situations, usually you will act more professionally. And that's what we mean by the strong situation overwhelm the effect. Now, the impact of the situation will be weaker if you are in an informal meeting and you like to, say jokes and stuff. If it's informal situation, then you will be more yourself in these situations. Another concept that you need to be aware of when you deal with your team or your employees is the locus of control. And the locus of control is the individual belief that about their internal control versus external control. What that means is if you believe that you control what happens to you, that means you have internal locus of control. And locus is a fancy word for location. So location of control, whether it's internal or external. Those who are externals are individuals who believe that the circumstances control their fate. So they are not as proactive as internals. They are not, they let things go usually. So you need to know your team members or your direct reports, what kind of personality do they have when it comes to locus of control. If they are internals, they may prefer more autonomy. They may prefer to do things the way that they want to do. So you provide minimal supervision to them. If they are externals, they need more direction. They need more guidance to do things. Okay, so that's the locus of control. Another terminology that you need to be aware of is the self-efficacy, and that's the your belief or the individual belief that they can actually meet the demands of the job and they can actually uh, do what they are required to do. Those who have high self-efficacy, they have confidence in themselves, they are usually better performers. Another um, term is the self-esteem, and that's their general feeling of their self-worth. Those who have high self-esteem, they believe in themselves, they believe in their capabilities and skills. So I encourage you to be in that category where you, because you're developing good skills, you are in a good school, you're learning, you're trying to advance your career. So you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have a high self-esteem and you think of yourself highly, because there are many people who did not take the necessary steps to be in college and to be that close to graduation. Self-monitoring, extent to which the individual base their behavior on cues on other people. So in simple terms, if you are a high self-monitoring person, you pay attention to what's surrounding you and you behave accordingly. You choose the right behavior and you monitor the situation, you monitor yourself, you monitor the reaction of others. And this is related to a very important trait that I talked about, or skill, that is the emotional intelligence, if you remember from the previous video. So please do pay attention to the surrounding, to the situation, to the interaction of people, so you can understand what's the whole situation is and you behave accordingly. And the positive or negative effect, and we are still talking about personality characteristics, those who have tendency to emphasize the positive aspects of themselves, the people, they are uh, positive people. So they think about things positively, they think about change positively, they think about new opportunities positively. So you would want to be in that category. Do not take things negatively. And it's very hard to deal with employees who have negative uh, perception or effect of things that are going around them. So you need to be aware of that in order to help them move from the negative status to positive status and to see things positively. There are also proactive personalities. These people are, they look at the opportunities. They try to find good things in everything. They interact to situations positively. They are better performers usually, and they are also better in advancing in their careers. So you would also want to be in that category. So how you can apply this in the organization? We will take take a look at one instrument or tool that is called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. They go by MBTI to stand for it, and it's what it basically does. It's a tool. It's an online tool that you answer many questions, maybe I think 60, 70 questions, and it helps identify your personality by giving you one of two of four categories. So you are either extroversion or introversion, you are either sensing or intuition, thinking or feeling, judging or perceiving. And they put these four categories in a matrix. So if you look at this one, for example, so these are the 16 types of people or personalities. So ISTJ, the I stands for introversion, S stands for sensing, T for thinking, and J for judging. So this one type, they are introversion, sensing, thinking, and perceiving, and judging. And we will see what each of these characteristics mean. But when you take this test or survey online, which I highly encourage you to do, it's free and you can answer this question and it will tell you what type of these 16 types associates the most with you. So the explanation of these pairs are as following. So extroversion versus introversion. You can read about this, but I'll just mention an example here. Extroversion individual, they are or individuals, they are outgoing, they usually speak then think, versus introversion, they think then they speak, and so on and so forth. You can read about these in your slides. Oops. Okay. So the 16 types, I've listed them here, and you can again read about them. Now, why would you do this? And why do companies actually ask employees to do them? My leader at one of my leaders at one of my rotations, they asked the team to take this MBTI test to identify who works with who in three teams that we were forming, because my leader wanted people who are wanted a combination of people in each team. He didn't want like one team who's focusing on thinking and one team focuses on judging. He tried to know these types of personalities to mix and diverse each team. So it's used to build teams, and it's used also for team building. So you design activities based on the type of individuals that you have in your team, and it's um, it's a very good tool. I really encourage you to take the test and then compare it with who you think you are, and then say, let me know if you think it's accurate or not. I think it's accurate, but just take it and let me know. Okay, so that's all with personality. Again, the key thing here is that understanding personalities of the individuals help the managers understand and direct the behavior of their employees. Okay. Now we talk about perception, and what perception means is, as you probably know now, the process of interpreting information about another person. So how you interpret a specific thing that this individual did, and how you interpret the whole situation. Now, this will be impacted by who you are, by the lenses that you look at the world with, by your culture, where you grew up. So if we look at this model of social perception, you'll see that in the social perception, there are many factors that impact the social perception. First category of factors is the characteristics of the perceiver, of yourself when you perceive something, and the characteristics of the target, the individual that you are perceiving something from, whether it's behavior or direction or a message, etc. So as for the perceiver, how does the characteristics of the perceiver influence the social perception. It depends on your perceptual lenses, and that's how you look at things, how you look at people, and how you think this individual is going to help you or not help you. Do you trust them or you don't trust them? Are they your leader, or they are, colleagues? So because when you perceive something from your leader, you usually accept it in a different way that when you perceive it from a colleague. So if your leader telling you that you have a better um, time management skills, you will perceive it differently than if you receive this same comment from a colleague or even from a direct report. Okay, so it depends on the lens that you look at this at the target and the one who's giving you the message. Perception is also relates to the attitudes, and there's an example that I usually use is women in manufacturing facilities. Usually, the leaders of manufacturing facilities, they don't promote females in leadership positions in manufacturing facilities because they have unconscious bias. In their minds, they believe that men are better at manufacturing than women, and that's factually incorrect. There are many examples of female engineers and female production leaders who did fantastic job. So as a leader, I would highly encourage you to remove this unconscious bias, to overcome it and deal with the individual, and deal with the decision. If you have a promotion decision and you need to promote either a male or female to a leadership position, just look at their skills and capabilities. Remove this gender bias completely from your mind. Perception is also impacted by your mood. So if you are in a good mood, you perceive things differently different than if you are in a bad mood. In the self concept, if you are if you have a positive self concept, you see positive things about people. So if your manager comes to you and tell you you have to develop your managerial or time management skills, if you look at this positively, you will perceive this positively. If you think of this as an opportunity to develop, if you see the positive thing in your leader, then you will perceive this positively. Finally, the cognitive structure. It depends on how your mind perceive individuals. So some people, if someone with specific physical traits talk to them, they trust more on them. So if you talk about if you are in a gym and someone with a strong body, with a healthy body comes and tells you that you need to do this instead of that, then you will perceive their message positively, and you'll do what they suggested that you do. But others, they may think about how professional this person is, and how and is he or she qualified to tell me what to do. So the consideration is either to the physical traits or the personality dispositions. Now, this is everything that we talked about is related to the perceiver, to you as a perceiver. Now, the characteristics of the target also impact the perception. Physical appearance, we just talked about it. When Someone in a suit with a very professional look gives you an advice about your stock investment, you will perceive it in a way that is different from your perception or the way that you perceive the same advice from someone who's wearing a t-shirt or wearing like shorts and telling you that you should change your financial investment decisions. So usually the more professional look that people have makes them more make them perceived better. And you can read about these other characteristics, the verbal communication, the way that they communicate with you, the nonverbal cues, and we will talk about these when we talk about the communication chapter. So you'll understand what nonverbal cues like the gestures and the eye contact and the position of your body, the way that you sit, do you cross your arms like this, do you sit like this? We'll talk more about this in the future. And finally, there's the characteristics of the situation, the context of the interaction or the situation will impact your perception as well. So to summarize, the social perception is impacted by three factors: the perceiver, the target, and the situation. Excuse me. One thing related to perception is the impression management. And impression management is how you manage your impression so it's perceived positively by others. So you want to be perceived positively because this will impact your uh, their judgment on your trustworthiness. Are you trustworthy or not? Are you professional or not? Are you helping them or you're just criticizing them? So you would want to manage how people perceive you, and that's again something that you can develop through the emotional intelligence skill development. Barriers to the perception. So this is a very, very important slide that I want you to take a very, very close look at because it tells you what are the things that prevent you from perceiving people the way that you are supposed to perceive them. So the first barrier is the selective perception. You only choose the information that helps and supports your personal view, and you don't listen to other things that contradicts with your personal view. In order to be successful in the workplace, you have to be objective and you have to listen to all viewpoints and remove your own viewpoint and try to understand the situation and the problem and whatever you're working on and get input from those who are surrounding you. So don't select just the information that support your personal view. Another key barrier is the stereotype, and we talked about the gender stereotype. We can, you can, I think I left it in the slides. Another stereotype that many people are facing is the stereotype against African Americans, against Asians, against Arabs, against people of the Middle East, people of, different backgrounds. Generalization is bad. Like when you uh, say that all this race is bad or all this ethnicity had this bad characteristic, that's definitely not a professional behavior and not an ethical behavior. So please be aware of stereotyping and try to avoid it. There's something called the first impression error, and we just talked about impression management. Sometimes you have a lasting impression about someone based on the initial perception that you have, or the first interaction that you have with this individual. And in many cases, and I'm sure you have many examples where you interacted with someone that you thought you like or dislike, and then you change your opinion as you interact with them more. So keep your stay flexible, and keep your eye open, uh, and your heart open when you deal with people, because some of them, even if you get a negative perception, they may be in a bad mood, they may be in a bad situation, and so don't make first impression error. Projection is another barrier, and that's when you have a few viewpoint or a belief or a value, and you project it to everyone else, and you think that all people share the same value or belief with you. And that's not correct, because especially in a world that we are living in, there are people from different backgrounds, and they have different value system and different belief system. So don't make this generalization about the beliefs and values. And finally, the self-fulfilling prophecy. It may drive your behavior in a negative way, because if you have if you think that someone is good, like you have a team of employees, and you believe that this individual is a high potential, then what you will do is that you will assign them with tasks and opportunities that will make them succeed. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But what you need to be aware of is to consider all the other team members as well. So don't let your prophecy about this particular individual limit you from other team members, uh, just because you want to fulfill your prophecy about this individual. So just be objective and look at all your team members equally, and try to give them opportunities, and don't let your self-fulfilling prophecy direct your behavior. Okay. Moving on to, or actually, this is an example of the stereotyping that I was mentioning, the racial stereotypes in hiring. Until this day, unfortunately, the African American community are still facing these challenges to get hired, whether it's a global organization or a small organization. And you can read about this research that found that white applicants were twice as more likely to receive a job offer than equally qualified black counterparts. You may think that we are done with this these days, we don't have this issue anymore, but it is still there, unfortunately. And as a future leaders, hopefully you will drive the movement toward less stereotyping, and evaluating people based on their capabilities and skills, not based on their race or religion or ethnical background. Okay, so we talked about personality, we talked about perception. Now we will talk about the third portion of this chapter, which is attribution. And as we saw in the first slide, that attribution impacts behavior. Let me bring this slide back so you remember what we are talking about, and then you can connect the dots. So remember the slides, we said that the person impacts the behavior, and under the person we have personality, we talked about that, perception, and now the attribution. And what attribution is, it's basically helping um, the creating the relationship between the cause and the effect. So it explains the causes of your behavior and others' behavior. So why someone did something, you attribute it to a characteristic or to a personality trait. So attribution is key because you want to avoid attribution errors when you do this attribution process. So when someone does something, don't directly attribute it to their personality or their um, characteristics. Try to understand the whole situation. And we'll see the two attribution biases or errors, and this will help you understand what I'm talking about. The first one is the fundamental attribution error, where you have a tendency to make attributions to internal causes when focusing on someone else's behavior. So an example that I have, if you did not do well in the exam, I would just I would assume that you are lazy, and that's fundamental attribution error. I attributed your low score in the exam to to internal cause that is related to your personality. I did not consider maybe you are having, issues with the internet connection. Maybe you had, a family emergency and you couldn't prepare well for the exam. So attribution is important when you deal with your employees, because you want to know to accurately attribute their behavior to the actual reason why they are actually behaving like this. So avoid the fundamental attribution error, and also avoid the self-serving bias, which is another attribution bias. And this self-serving bias is to attribute the success to internal causes and failure to external causes. Very good example. If you get an A in a class or an exam, you would say, I got an A. But when you get a D, you'll say that the professor gave me D. So you attribute good results to internal causes, and you attribute bad results to external causes. Okay, so try to avoid these attribution biases, whether with your team members or with your direct reports. And this leads us to the end of this series of videos. Again, I appreciate your understanding, because there was no way that I can miss the conference that I'm heading to in Houston. Nothing is changing with the due assignments and the due dates. It's still the same. You definitely need to submit those assignments on time to get the full score. Um, we will meet next week, like the week of the 17th. And if you have any questions about chapter 1, chapter 17, 18, and 3, write them down and we will talk about them in class. Okay, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and I will see you later.